Thank you all for participating in this important webinar. I'll just say briefly that initially I had understood the question that I was supposed to respond to is what happens the day after Gaza? And I was going to offer some thoughts about that. And so what I'll do is I'll abbreviate my thoughts about Gaza and move into more general. But since I think it's important to point them out, look, I think it's been mentioned by many specialists on the Arab world and on Israel's strategic predicament that the only way that you can convince the Arabs that they've lost a war is to take land from them. And in this case, it's not taking some colony somewhere else. It's part of the land of Israel that we unilaterally walked away from idiotically. I think it's been proven in 2005 with the delusion that if we go away, then they won't have any rationale for fighting us any longer. It was the same rationale we had when we left Lebanon in 2000 unilaterally and just handed the entire country over lock, stock, and barrel to Hezbollah and Iran. Thinking that they were only going to attack us because we were there, which was never true, but it was something that our deluded left, which was in charge at both times, had convinced itself of, and through the media here, had convinced us large enough proportion of the public in order to force it down the throat of everybody with common sense. At any rate, what we found is that the only way that we can pacify Gaza and ensure that we achieve the goals of this war, which are not only to defeat Hamas, to destroy their regime, but also to prevent Gaza from posing a threat to us in the future, is by annexing large swaths of Gaza. We have to take over northern Gaza, and we have to settle it, and we have to take over the border zone with Egypt, and we have to settle it. And we have to take over a perimeter that's significant, whose depth is significant enough to block any movement from west to east into the border communities that were overrun and into southern Israel in general ever again. And that can be anywhere from 3 to 5 kilometers, 10 kilometers, whatever it is. But that's the way to actually prove to the Palestinians and everybody watching beyond any doubt that Israel has won. Now, is that a viable option today? Not with the Biden-Harris administration in office. It's not. And so we've scaled back our aspirations and our war goals to try to be something that's minimally acceptable to the Americans that enables us to survive as a nation. And here we have to understand that it's simply true that if we don't win this war, we will place ourselves in even greater threat to our survival, because what we saw on October 7th was a taste of what they all want to accomplish here. And we simply can't allow that to happen. And so the minimal way of doing this is to have permanent Israeli security control over the Philadelphia corridor, which is the border zone with Egypt. It's 14 kilometers long from east to west. And that has to be under sole Israeli security control. And I dare say all of Gaza has to be under sole Israeli security control. So that's what we're looking at right now. And obviously, it's an ongoing, very unproductive discussion with the Biden administration, which has been suing for an Israeli defeat in this war since day one. But that would be the minimal goal. And as to the entire territory, look, I think I wrote my book, The Israeli Solution, back in 2013. And at the time, there was a lot of optimism in the sense that the Arabs of the land of Israel, both in Judea and Samaria and in Israel itself, among our Arab citizens, their response to the rise of Islamist forces in Egypt and the civil war in Syria in particular made them begin to view Israel as the safest port in the storm. And there was an integrationist pulse that was rushing through Israeli Arab society. You had increasing number of Israeli Arab parents sending their children to Hebrew language rather than Arabic language schools and matriculating into universities in Israel rather than in Jordan, which had been their practice. You had increasing levels of participation and desire to participate in national service and even in military service, not only among Israeli Arabs who were Christian, but also among Israeli Muslims. So these were all new things, and they led me to think that if given the choice between integrating them into Israel's citizenry or or giving them a state, that the safer bet for Israel under all circumstances is to integrate them, even as citizens, into Israel. Because the threat that a Palestinian state poses, as we saw on October 7th, is a threat to our very survival. It's an existential threat, because the sole organizing principle of Palestinian national ethos, as we've seen it expressed both in their internal discourse and in their treatment of Israel, is that they are defined solely by their desire to annihilate Israel. Aside from that, they have no edifying principles that define them as any sort of nation. They're a nation that was born in response to the establishment of the State of Israel and the building of the State of Israel in pre-war, in pre-state days, and that is what they have remained throughout. And so, since that is the case, as we saw again on October 7th, a Palestinian state that is established west of the Jordan River in the landmass that is the land of Israel will be an existential threat to Israel. And under those circumstances, it was my view in 2013 that naturalizing a large number of Palestinians in Judea and Samaria was a better option. And it's not that I disagree with my thoughts from the time, but intervening factors have played out in the meantime since I wrote the book, which are that the Israeli Arab community has been radicalized, and we've seen the rise of the Islamic movement even more powerfully than it had been in the past. We've seen the downfall or the disenfranchisement almost of Arab Israelis who are integrationists, and we've seen with the rise of ISIS and other forces in the Muslim world and the stabilization of Syria under Iranian hegemony, that that integrationist impulse that had been so marked a decade ago has been overcome by an irredentist Islamist impulse that's been racing through. So at this point, given that that's the state of Israeli Arabs, and it's even more the state of Palestinian Arabs in Judea and Samaria, who have been given just an enormous amount of money and arms from Iran over the past many years, and have been further radicalized. I don't think that you can naturalize them, certainly not in my lifetime. And I think that over time, the best option is, I think, one that Ambassador Friedman lays out, but I'm going to leave it to him to explain. You know, we have this Palestinian Authority, which has to be dismantled because it's a terrorist authority, and it cannot be allowed to maintain legitimacy politically. Its only purpose as a political entity is to war against Israel, both on the warfare of the politics, the international arena in places like the UN and the United States, on U.S. college campuses, etc., and from a terrorist perspective on the ground in Israel. And so that has to be dismantled and delegitimized because it's a terrorist entity. And then allow, along the lines that Professor Kedar set out, local Arab leadership to take over and assert autonomous leadership of population centers in the major cities in Judea and Samaria. Regarding the governance of Gaza going forward, that I certainly wouldn't cast aside his offer of the sort of emirate policy in the Gaza Strip. But again, you know, this has to be very clearly a truncated territory of Gaza after what they've done and what they're still doing, and that's basically how I see it. We have a long political battle ahead of us. We'll be in a much better position if President Trump is reelected in November than we will be if Kamala Harris becomes the next president. That's for sure, which is what leads me to be almost afraid to say what we need for victory, because the Americans are acting in such a hostile way right now towards Israel in so many different ways. And so it leads me to feel that I realistically have to curtail our aspirations. But over the long term, I think what we saw on October 7th has indicated clearly that even the discourse that we've had for the past generation of a Palestinian state, of a two-state solution, and so forth, they're not they're no longer, it's not just that they're no longer relevant, it's that they're dangerous because they place us in a straitjacket intellectually and from a policy perspective that endangers Israel's existence, that empowers the worst forces both in the region and I dare say in the United States as well. It makes Jews very hard pressed to defend themselves against anti-Semites because they have not had it explained to them that as the Palestinians see the world, this is a zero-sum game, and there can't be peaceful coexistence. And so supporting a Palestinian statehood essentially means supporting the annihilation of the Jews. And so, we have to move beyond the discourse. It's extremely important that we move past it as quickly as possible, which is why webinars and discussions and forums like this are so important. But that also places us in a position where we're heading into a very large clash with the U.S. government if Kamala Harris wins the election in November. At any rate, we're going to have to deal with this one way or another, and we will. So that those are my thoughts in a nutshell. And I'm sure that the ambassador who just wrote a new book about this will probably have much more to add to the discussion.